Immanuel Kant, Critique of Pure Reason, Preface to the First Edition. Human reason has the peculiar fate in one species of its cognitions that it is burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss, since they are given to it as problems by the nature of reason itself, but which it also cannot answer, since they transcend every capacity of human reason. Reason falls into this perplexity through no fault of its own. It begins from principles whose use is unavoidable in the course of experience, and at the same time sufficiently warranted by it. With these principles, it rises, as its nature also requires, even higher, to more remote conditions. But since it becomes aware in this way that its business must always remain incomplete, because the questions never cease, reason sees itself necessitated to take refuge in principles that overstep all possible use in experience, and yet seem so unsuspicious that even ordinary common sense agrees with them. But it thereby falls into obscurity and contradictions, from which it can indeed surmise that it must somewhere be proceeding on the ground of hidden errors, but it cannot discover them. For the principles on which it is proceeding, since they surpass the bounds of all experience, no longer recognize any touchstone of experience. The battlefield of these endless controversies is called metaphysics. There was a time when metaphysics was called the queen of all the sciences, and if the world be taken for the deed, it deserved this title of honor, on account of the preeminent importance of its object. Now, in accordance with the fashion of the age, the queen proves despised on all sides, and the matron, outcast and forsaken, mourns like Hecuba. Greatest of all by race and birth, I now am cast out, powerless. Metamorphoses. In the beginning, under the administration of the dogmatists, her rule was despotic. Yet, because her legislations still retained traces of ancient barbarism, this rule gradually degenerated through internal wars into complete anarchy, and the skeptics, a kind of nomads who abhor all permanent cultivation of the soil, shattered civil unity from time to time. But since there were fortunately only a few of them, they could not prevent the dogmatists from continually attempting to rebuild, though never according to a plan unanimously accepted among themselves. Once in recent times, it even seemed as though an end would be put to all these controversies, and the lawfulness of all the competing claims would be completely decided through a certain physiology of the human understanding by the famous Locke. But it turned out that, although the birth of the purported queen was traced to the rabble of common experience, and her pretensions would therefore have been rightly rendered suspicious, nevertheless, she still asserted her claims, because in fact, this genealogy was attributed to her falsely. Thus, metaphysics fell back into the same old worm-eaten dogmatism, and thus into the same position of contempt out of which the science was to have been extricated. Now, after all paths, as we persuade ourselves, have been tried in vain, what rules is tedium and complete indifferentism. the mother of chaos and night in the sciences, but at the same time also the origin, or at least the prelude, of the incipient transformation and enlightenment, when through ill-applied effort they have become obscure, confused, and useless. For it is pointless to affect indifference with respect to such inquiries, to whose object human nature cannot be indifferent. Moreover, however, much they may think to make themselves unrecognizable by exchanging the language of the schools for a popular style, these so-called indifferentists, to the extent that they think anything at all, always unavoidably fall back into metaphysical assertions, which they yet professed so much to despise. Nevertheless, this indifference, occurring amid the flourishing of all sciences, and directed precisely at those sciences whose results, if such are to be had at all, we could least do without, is a phenomena deserving our attention and reflection. This is evidently the effect not of the thoughtlessness of our age, but of its ripened power of judgment, which will no longer be put off with, excuse me, which will no longer be put off with illusory knowledge, and which demands that reason should take on anew the most difficult of all its tasks, namely that of self-knowledge, and to institute a court of justice, by which reason may secure its rightful claims while dismissing all its groundless pretensions. And this not by mere decrees, but according to its eternal and unchangeable laws. And this court is none other than the critique of pure reason itself. Yet by this I do not understand a critique of books and systems, but a critique of the faculty of reason in general, in respect of all the cognitions after which reason might strive independently of all experience, and hence the decision about the possibility or impossibility of a metaphysics in general, and the determination of its sources as well as its extent and boundaries, all, however, from principles. It is on this path, the only one left, that I have set forth, and I flatter myself that in following it, I have succeeded in removing all those errors that have so far put reason into dissension with itself in its non-experiential use. I have not avoided reason's questions by pleading the incapacity of human reason as an excuse. Rather, I have completely specified these questions according to its principles. And after discovering the point where reason has misunderstood itself, I have resolved them to reason's full satisfaction. To be sure, the answer to these questions has not turned out just as dogmatically enthusiastic lust for knowledge might have expected, for the latter could not be satisfied except through magical powers in which I am not an expert. Yet, this was also not the intent of our reason's natural vocation, and the duty of philosophy was to abolish the semblance arising from misinterpretation, even if many prized and beloved delusions have to be destroyed in the process. In this business, I have made comprehensiveness my chief aim in view, and I make bold to say that there cannot be a single metaphysical problem that has not been solved here, or at least to the solution of which the key has not been provided. In fact, pure reason is such a perfect unity that if its principle were insufficient for even a single one of the questions that are set forward by its own nature, then this principle might as well be discarded, because then it is also then it also would not be up to answering any of the other questions with complete reliability. While I am saying this, I believe I perceive in the face of the reader an indignation mixed with contempt at claims that are apparently so pretentious and immodest, and yet they are incomparably more moderate than those of any author of the commonest program who pretends to prove the simple nature of the soul or the necessity of a first beginning of the world. For such an author pledges himself to extend human cognition beyond all bounds of possible experience, of which I humbly admit that this wholly surpasses my capacity. Instead, I have to do merely with reason itself and its pure thinking. To gain exhaustive acquaintance with them, I need not seek far beyond myself, because it is in myself that I encounter them, and common logic already also gives me an example of how the simple acts of reason may be fully and systematically enumerated. Only here the question is raised how much I may hope to settle with these simple acts, as if all the material and assistance of experience are taken away from me. So much for the completeness in reaching each of the ends, and for the comprehensiveness in reaching all of them together, which ends are not proposed arbitrarily, but are set up for us by the nature of cognition itself as the matter of our critical investigation. I'm going to read that paragraph again. So much for the completeness in reaching each of the ends, and for the comprehensiveness in reaching all of them together, which ends are not proposed arbitrarily, but are set up for us by the nature of cognition itself as the matter of our critical investigation. Furthermore, certainty and clarity, two things that concern the form of the investigation, are to be viewed as essential demands, which may rightly be made on the author who ventures upon so slippery an undertaking. As far as certainty is concerned, I have myself pronounced the judgment that in this kind of inquiry it is in no way allowed to hold opinions, and that anything that even looks like an hypothesis is a forbidden commodity, which should not be put up for sale even at the lowest price, but must be confiscated as soon as it is discovered. For every cognition that is supposed to be certain a priori claims For every cognition that is supposed to be certain, a priori proclaims that it wants to be held for absolutely necessary. And even more is this true of a determination of all pure cognitions a priori, which is to be the standard and thus even the example of all apodictic philosophical certainty. Whether I have performed what I have just pledged in that respect remains wholly to the judgment of the reader, since it is appropriate for an author only to present the grounds, but not to judge about their effect on his judges. But in order that he should not inadvertently be the cause of weakening his own arguments, the author may be permitted to note himself those places that, even though they pertain only to the incidental end of the work, may be the occasion for some mistrust, in order that he may in a timely manner counteract the influence that even the slightest reservation on this point may have on his judgment over the chief end. I am acquainted with no investigations more important for getting to the bottom of that faculty we call the understanding, and at the same time for the determination of the rules and boundaries of its use, than those I have undertaken in the second chapter of the Transcendental Analytic, under the title Deduction of the Pure Concepts of the Understanding. They are also the investigations that have cost me the most, but I hope not unrewarded effort. This inquiry, which goes rather deep, has two sides. One side refers to the objects of the pure understanding, and is supposed to demonstrate and make comprehensible the objective validity of its concepts a priori. Thus, it belongs essentially to my ends. The other side deals with the pure understanding itself, concerning its possibility and the powers of cognition on which it itself rests. Thus, it considers it in a subjective relation. And although this exposition is of great importance in respect of my chief end, it does not belong essentially to it, because the chief question always remains: what and how much can understanding and reason cognize free of all experience? And not, how is the faculty of thinking itself possible? Since the latter question is something like the search for the cause of a given effect, and is therefore something like a hypothesis, although, as I elsewhere take the opportunity to show, this is not in fact how matters stand, it appears as if I am taking the liberty, in this case, of expressing an opinion, and that the reader might therefore be free to hold another opinion. In view of this, I must remind the reader in advance that even in case my subjective deduction does not produce the complete conviction that I expect, the objective deduction that is my primary concern would come into its full strength, on which it is said at pages A92-3, should even be sufficient by itself. Finally, as regards clarity, the reader has a right to demand first discursive, logical clarity through concepts, but then also intuitive, aesthetic clarity through intuitions, that is, through examples or other illustrations in concreto. I have taken sufficient care for the former. That was essential to my undertaking, but was also the contingent cause of the fact that I could not satisfy the second demand, which is less strict but still fair. In the progress of my labor, I have been almost constantly undecided how to deal with this matter. Examples and illustrations always appeared necessary to me, and hence actually appeared in their proper place in my first draft. But then I looked at the size of my task and the many objects with which I would have to do, and I became aware that this alone, treated in a dry, merely scholastic manner, would suffice to fill an extensive work. Thus, I found it inadvisable to swell it further with examples and illustrations, which are necessary only for a popular aim, especially since this work could never be made suitable for popular use. The real experts in the science do not have so much need for things to be made easy for them, although this would always be agreeable. Here it could also have brought with it something counterproductive. The Abbe Terrason, the Abbe Terrason, says that if the size of a book is measured not by the number of pages, but by the time needed to understand it, then it can be said of many a book that it would be much shorter if it were not so short. But, on the other hand, if we direct our view toward the intelligibility of a whole of speculative cognition that is wide-ranging and yet is connected in principle, we could with equal right say that many a book would have been much clearer if it had not been made quite so clear. For the aids to clarity help in the parts, but often confuse in the whole. Since the reader cannot quickly enough attain a survey of the whole, and all their bright colors paint over and make unrecognizable the articulation or structure of the system, which yet matters most when it comes to judging its unity and soundness. It can, as it seems to me, be no small inducement for the reader to unite his effort with that of the author, when he has the prospect of carrying out, according to the outline given above, a great and important piece of work, and that in a complete and lasting way. Now metaphysics, according to the concepts we will give of it here, is the only one of all the sciences that may promise that little but unified effort, and indeed, in a short time, will complete it in such a way that nothing remains to posterity except to adapt it in a didactic manner to its intentions, yet without being able to add to its content in the least. For it is nothing but the inventory of all we possess through pure reason, ordered systematically. Nothing here can escape us, because what reason brings forth entirely out of itself cannot be hidden, but is brought to light by reason itself as soon as reason's common principle has been discovered. The perfect unity of this kind of cognition, and the fact that it arises slowly out of pure concepts without any influence that would extend or increase it from experience or even particular intuition, which would lead to a determinate experience, make this unconditioned completeness not only feasible but also necessary. Dwell in your own house, and you will know how simple your possessions are. Perseus. Such a system of pure speculative reason I hope myself to deliver, under the title Metaphysics of Nature, which will be not half so extensive, but will be incomparably richer in content than this critique, which had first to display the sources and conditions of its possibility, and needed to clear and level a ground that was completely overgrown. Here I expect from my reader the patience and impartiality of a judge, but there I will expect the cooperative spirit and assistance of a fellow worker. For however completely the principles of the system may be expounded in the critique, the comprehensiveness of the system itself requires also that no derivative concept should be lacking, which, however, cannot be estimated a priori in one leap, but must be gradually sought out. Likewise, just as in the former, the whole synthesis of concepts has been exhausted, so in the latter it would be additionally demanded that the same thing should take place in respect of their analysis, which would be easy and more entertainment than labor. I have only a few more things to remark with respect to the book's printing. Since the beginning of the printing was somewhat delayed, I was able to see only about half the proof sheets, in which I have come upon a few printing errors, though none that confuse the sense except the one occurring at page A379, fourth line from the bottom, where the specific should be read in the place of skeptical. The antinomy of pure reason from page A425 to page A461 is arranged in the manner of a table, so that everything belonging to the thesis always continues on the left side and what belongs to the antithesis on the right side, which I did in order to make it easier to compare proposition and counter proposition with one another.